And I look to my left, and there's a man with like a white hat on, like a white kind of like small turban on his head. The back of his head is facing me, and he turns to look at me, and it's a decomposed face, right? And then it was kind of Indiana Jones as well. It was like a snake came out of one eye and went in the other, right? And I said, this decomposing face said to me, "Don't come here."
Welcome back. I'm here again with Darragh Mason. Darragh, welcome back.
Hello, great to be back. Thanks for having me back. It's a good sign.
By the way, this is not the part 2 of the Dark Men. We'll do that sometime in the near future. But this is what we're going to talk about is the Jinn. I think offline I was remarking to you how similar the Jinn are to the Fae.
Yeah.
And let's just get started with, how did you talked a little bit about it in the last episode.
Yeah.
But why did you decide to start focusing on the Jinn?
So in 2016, I went to Delhi in India with this specific goal of shooting a story on the Jinn. I used to be a travel and documentary photographer. There's an author called William Dalrymple, who's a Scottish historian, travel writer. Fantastic writer, wonderful writer. And he wrote a book called City of Jinns. I spent a lot of time in India, and a lot of it really was inspired by his work, But the City of Jinns book is his kind of love letter to Delhi. It's essentially his notes on his first year as a correspondent from Delhi, right? And he uses this motif of jinns throughout, where he talks about these spirits, these fire spirits, who loved Delhi so much that they refused to let it fail. And it's destroyed like 5 times and comes up again through the ashes. And that the Jinn, that the kind of the mythos that he heard from the people in Delhi is that the Jinn refused to let Delhi die because they loved it so much. So I decided to go to Delhi in 2016 to shoot the locations he mentioned in his book. And what happened was maybe about a month out, I had a quite intense dream where I was in a Muslim area of Delhi, and I was at a Sufi celebration. So it was lots of fun, loud music,
and that's
passionate
basically
singing.
The most mystical of Islamic sects, right?
Oh yeah.
Sufis.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I'm in that area, sat on the ground amongst the crowd listening, and it's like white marble, really, really pretty place, And I look to my left, and there's a man with like a white hat on, like a white kind of like small turban on his head. The back of his head is facing me, and he turns to look at me, and it's a decomposed face, right? And then it was kind of Indiana Jones as well. It was like a snake came out of one eye and went in the other, right? And I said, this decomposing face said to me, "Don't come here," right?
Back up for a second. Did you see this in a
in a dream?
Like in a dream?
No, in a dream. Yeah, in a dream. Yeah.
Level set.
Yeah. And I woke up, and I was questioning this because I was like, I can't really look at this in any other way that just isn't making me nervous. I'm supposed to be going to Delhi in a month. I'm superstitious enough to be rattled by it, but kind of like equally, rational enough to go, well, I'm still going. It's just, it's not going to stop me. And in the interim, I was doing a lot of nighttime photography where I was like tracking stars and taking photographs of the celestial bodies moving, a long time lapse. And the camera body that I was taking to Delhi, I was using it for that. Relatively new camera, no issues with it at all. And while I was playing back some of the footage, because it would automatically generate the time lapse raw film in camera, I was playing back that footage, and there was like a weird mark moving across the screen. So I thought it was like an insect. I thought it was like a fly kind of moving on it. And then I was like, well, why would a fly be there for like an hour? Because that's like a 30-second exposure. Each frame is 30 seconds. You got 24 frames a second. That would mean that fly
you wouldn't catch
there.
A fly at all.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. So I'm like, that's really weird. And then I cleaned my lens, thinking maybe it's something like that, or, some speck of dirt that was slowly blowing across the lens.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
Shot again that night, the following morning, the same thing. So I'm like, okay, this is weird. Now, my standard practice before I would go traveling would be take my kit into a technician and get the sensor cleaned, right? So there's no dust bunnies or anything like that on the sensor that will turn up in the shots. Did that.
By the way, that's a whole process, as I've had.
Yeah.
Done,
yeah,
right?
It's not fun.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Yep. So drop the camera body in with the lens, give it a full clean. You know, I'm heading off when I sure the kit's working. Come back 2 days later, the guy's like, I don't know what this is. I've cleaned it and it's come back. Okay, so I don't know what's going on. Leave it with me for another day. Come back tomorrow and we'll have another go at it. Come back the following day. He's like, I don't know what it is. I've given this a deep clean. It keeps coming back. Right. Here's a number for the technicians who the Nikon and Canon people go to when they've got something wrong with the kit, right?
What did this thing look like again?
It was like a dark blotch moving across the image, right? Like you could tell it wasn't a photograph of a thing. It was something in between the lens and the sensor. Something was happening, right? So anyway, I take it to these super technicians. They're down these back alleys in Soho in London. Drop it in. It's like an old place, and give them the camera, give them the background. They're like, okay, come back in 2 days. Oh no, we'll ring you in 2 days. They rang me in 2 days going, we can't find what this is. It's some kind of oil that's leaking across your sensor. We recommend you just remove the internal box and put another one in. I'm like, well, that's about £1,000. You know, it's just not worth it. So I'm like, okay, I'm now 2 weeks away from India. I have no camera body, you know, a bit stuffed. Then a friend of mine managed to bail me out. I buy his camera body, one of his camera bodies off him for about the same price. And it's actually a better camera. So I'm like, okay, it is what it is. I haven't come out winning. You know, I'm definitely down on money, but we'll get on with it.
And plus, you're not used to using whatever particular model of camera you probably got.
Yeah, it's definitely different, you know, but we're getting on with it. But what happens then is that my dad's coming with me for this trip. So it's kind of about, well, I want to see what you do when you go over to these countries, and it'd be great to go together. So, okay, cool. So he flies over from Ireland. We're in London, waiting to depart. He breaks his tooth in the airport, in Heathrow Airport. Literally, his tooth cracks, right? So he's, you know, not having a great time. You know, as we get on like a 20-hour flight to the Middle East, and then from the Middle East to Delhi. We arrive in Delhi. My hotel won't answer their call, won't answer the phone. And I've stayed there a couple of times before, so I knew the place. I'm trying to get there. I got dealing with a lot of scammers. And again, this is my third time in India. I spent 6 months there. I know this area of Delhi pretty well, right? So I'm not kind of greenhorn just getting off. They're like, please take my money off me. You know, I'm not that's not the kind of person that I was then. You know, I'd earned my stripes, as it were. Anyway, my hotel still won't answer their phone. These guys are trying to scam us. And then I eventually kind of basically spot what they're doing, grab my dad, and we just bail and find this hotel. We're in the Blue Radisson in Connaught Place in Delhi. It's not where I wanted to stay. I'm like, can you phone my actual hotel while we have breakfast here? Because we've been up all night flying, so we were tired, all that kind of stuff. And we end up having to change hotel 3 times in 2 days. It's a real pain. But my dad gets seen to, and he's back in the game with a temporary filling, so we're not too bad. And then I get to meet my fixer. So the agency I was working for had a Delhi branch one of the guys who worked at the Delhi branch was put in contact with me, who was going to basically help me get to the locations I needed to get to and translate for me. And the first location we went to was a place called Firozshah Kotla. And this was this kind of amazing grotto with it had like a pillar of Ashkatan on the top of it. So the pillars of Ashkatan are these incredible, I mean, they're seriously old, right? They're like, so Firozshah Kotla was one of the Delhi cities. Delhi is made up of 5 cities. And this would have been Firozabad. And which is, I think, around the 15th century, or no, I tell a lie, around the 14th century, right? But the pillar on top goes all the way back to the 3rd century BC. Like, it's like pretty old Brahmin age India. And this area is associated with having kind of been home to 10,000 jinn. So Shams, my fixer, is like, takes us down there, and we go up to the gate, and we ask they got like a little kind of, tin can for petty cash. And there's like a soldier there with an assault rifle and this old lady collecting the money. And Shams is like, can you tell us where the shrine to the jinn are? And they won't answer us.
Yeah,
they're just kind of they're just stonewalling us, kind of just gently, kind of, not giving us a yes or no answer. And I ask them again, and then they're no, and we head in deeper into the complex. And there's a guy in a bungalow in this kind of park area sitting outside. And we ask him, can you tell us where the kind of the shrine is? And he was like chatty beforehand. And we mentioned that. And he's like, just clamps up. He's like, you're on your own, guys. And it turned out it was like literally in our field of vision, right? It was like right behind the guy. So we're like, okay, clock it. We head over and have a look at it. And
without answering the question yet, is there a reason they're all quiet once you ask this? I mean, there obviously is, but...
Oh, yeah, 100%. They don't want to piss Jinn off.
Did you ultimately find out why? Don't answer, but did you ultimately find out why?
They wouldn't tell me, right? But it became fairly apparent that the reason they wouldn't tell us, is that they didn't want to anger the jinn, right, in the site by bringing some foreigner in. So it was different because I was there and I was asking specifically about the jinn. They were like, no thanks. There's too many combinations here that are, could be problematic. So we head in, and it's like this kind of 3-tier kind of like pyramidal structure with this column on top, and around it, it's all fenced off. So like in theory, you're not supposed to be able to get in. Obviously, the fences are all open. All the gates are all open, so you can just go in. But there's just plate after plate of curds and like spoiled milk and curds that are left there, and sweets, right? Plate after plate of them. And they're all offerings. So people are just leaving offerings of incense of this milk and curds for the jinn. And what I kept finding are these little passport photographs of people and these letters, right? And thankfully I had somebody who could read and speak Urdu with me, so I'm like, what are these letters? And they're petitions. So they're literally letters that people wrote and photocopied, and we're putting the same letter at each grotto in this complex as a petition to the kind of the genius Loki, the spirit in the place, the jinn, to intercede on their behalf, right? For whatever that might be. And like some of the letters were like, I want to go to Hollywood and be a star, or I want to win the national lottery and win all the golds, in the Indian National Lottery. Others are like, help my children get free of drug abuse, all that kind of stuff. So it's the gamut of human desires and need, right? But there was an interesting thing where there was these like passport photographs kind of stapled to these letters, right? It was like, this is me, if you're looking for me, here I am. And these were all over the place, including little oil lamps were left there. And we bumped into this family who were going from grotto to grotto. We asked them, like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we're petitioning the jinn we're doing like a 14th-day ritual to ask the jinn to intercede on our behalf. We're like, well, is it working? And he's like, yeah, it's already starting to work. We're on day 10 and things are already happening. Things are changing. And they were going around, they were leaving water, they were leaving kind of sweets and incense at all of these grottos. And like, this was kind of like, once you got inside the complex, it was like proper kind of like stink of bat guano, but also with like sandalwood incense and like bats whizzing around, like, so it was kind of, very on brand. And
Yeah, what's the deal with bats? What's the anything about bats that's...
I mean, nothing in particular. They just tend to hang out in these slightly sinister places. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, kind of, when I got back to Ireland and kind of looked at kind of a similar fairy lore, because this kind of led me back to fairy lore very much so, is that you have a very similar thing with gifts for the fairy. You leave butter and milk, and that's exactly what they were doing here. Dishes of butter and milk and bread.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
So almost the identical type of offering that would be given. And this family told us what they were doing and explained things to us. That was fine. It was grand. There was even kind of like places where there was little padlocks locked onto the bars of the grill. And you often see that in bridges. I don't know if you get it in America, but in Western Europe, couples will often put a little padlock on a bridge with their initials scribed on it, And it's kind of like a, we're symbolizing our love together. But in reality, what they're doing is a little bit of love magic, where they are locked together. They need a key to open and break that relationship. So the lock on the fences symbolizes a certain thing, right? It's almost like this is a contract between me as the human being invoking and asking the spirit to intercede on my behalf, and if you do that for me, you'll get what I said I'll give you. That might be prayer, like devotion, more offerings, that kind of stuff. But that's broadly what's happening with that. That's what that's symbolizing in that exchange. So the next day we went to another site, and this place was called Khawaja Muradin Kushti. And this is in the Central Ridge Forest of Delhi. Now, this was the only site that wasn't actually in William Dalrymple's book, but this was like a tiny little like pillbox in the middle of nowhere. Well, not in the middle of nowhere, but it's very kind of, there's no other structures around, right in the middle of this forest, right? Yes, secluded, thank you. And it kind of had it was Thursday, which was the day when people were brought who had Jinn problems to be treated. Okay, so people who were suffering from this type of spiritual problem. I've got some photographs I can share if that's useful at all. Okay, well, so that's the shrine. So what we have here is, again, you find a very simple shrine. It's the grave of a Sufi saint inside here. Okay. So the green material that you'll see covering this green air conditioning unit, you'll see that over the graves. This is kind of the sacred color of Islam, the green, right? So it represents Jannah or heaven. Now there's like that chintzy welcome mat there, you see there. That would be essentially where a person would stand if they had a jinn problem or a possession problem with an evil spirit. And just to the left in the doorway, you see a chain hanging down from the architrave of the door. That's inside the shrine. That's in the background. That's the shrine caretaker or exorcist. Let me see if it'll get a photograph of the exterior. These little red cords, similar to the locks, they're about promises, right? So generally that's for women looking for children, right? This is the grave, the candles, the grave, flowers on the grave. That's the caretaker, that's his ancestor in the grave. But now hopefully I can find the picture I'm looking for. There we go. Right, so that's the chain. Right, so this is significant, right? So the caretaker explained to me this is an iron chain, right? In this location.
Right?
Yes, that's exactly it, right? So if a person is possessed, they can't hold the chain or they can't pass the threshold into the shrine. Malevolent jinn and the souls of the restless dead, they won't be able to kind of hold onto the chain or pass over the threshold.
There's something in ceremonial magic where you're not supposed to have any iron or...
So iron is a repellent to fairies as well. Yeah. So to prevent your children being snatched by changelings, people will put iron thongs across the baby's crib or they dangle iron scissors over the crib, right? But this is where the horseshoe over the doorway is. It's a barrier. The iron is a barrier to any kind of malevolent spirits that could cause issues. That's the first test to see if they have a Jinn issue. And this is Shams holding it. So can you see these full screen? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Cool. Now these pots are called maklas, and that's just basically your standard kind of pot for holding water. And essentially, these were dotted all over the forest ground. And I was kind of wondering what they were. And Ali, the caretaker, was like, "Yeah, don't touch those." Right. And you know the whole thing of the genie in the bottle, the genie in the lamp, right? That's what these are. Correct. They're prisons. So this is what they trap the Jinn in. So these are dotted around the forest floor, right near the grounds of the shrine, and they're said to contain like trapped Jinn in the bottle.
Malevolent Jinn.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah, and that's some of the shrine material. I can't tell if I'm sharing the right page. I don't know if you're seeing the small versions of it. More iron chain on like a sacred tree. So again, person would be holding the iron. Can they hold it? If they can't, then we know that there's something wrong and proceed to doing what they call ruqya, which is a type of healing to extract the Jinn from the human being.
How often do people have an adverse reaction to this stuff?
He didn't give me a sense of the frequency, but essentially he said the process was it would be determining who has a mental health issue, who has specifically a Jinn issue, or what he'd call more broadly an evil spirit. He said he would be in communication with the saint, the saint within the tomb. The spirit of the saint would communicate to him. He said it was in the form of flags, so he'd get an impression of a green flag if it was a mental health issue, and he'd go, like, you need to go to seek.
So it's like semaphores, sort of.
Yeah, essentially, yes. That's what he was describing, yeah. And then red flag was a bit more trouble, really. So we hung around this place for the day, took a lot of images, and then we headed to the next one, Nizamuddin Darg. And this is a tomb in central Old Delhi, and it's a fabulous place. That's actually a video of the place, but this is everything you think of when you think of kind of like proper old India in Delhi. This is that kind of place. There's just winding lanes and like lots of noise, people selling stuff, wallahs everywhere selling whatever you're looking for, before it opens up into the Darg, which is this tomb of the saints. So Nizamuddin Aliyah is this preeminent Sufi saint of the subcontinent. This whole place is named after him. So that's the last time I went, which was in 2019. So I went back. I was back there in 2019 and kind of had a conference and kind of dipped out for a quick run around Old Delhi. But here you got like mutton biryani, just a quintessential dish. Fabulous. I'm not getting into Indian food, but it was absolutely brilliant. But you're going down kind of all these winding lanes till you get into Nizamuddin. These are flowers to buy to leave on the graves of the saints. Now, if you look up here on this sign as you're going in, so this is an advertisement by the Sufis in the area, right, who would be running the shrine site. And you'll see a spiritual treatment for a solution of any kind of problem, and then you can see spiritual treatment for the solution of any kind of problem, e.g. business, marriage, bad air, jadoo tana, children, success, love, education, journey, court, right? They are magical solutions. At the top of this, in the top of the picture, you can see up here, that's a magical square. Right. So it's literally got a magical sigil on the item, an Islamic magical sigil, and talking about we can fix your problems. And this is Nizamuddin.
What characters were the, like, what language was that in the?
So they don't look Arabic to me.
No, they don't at all. They look Hebrew.
They look Hebrew. Yeah, they look Hebrew. Yeah.
Is that so? Am I wrong about that, or is that Hebrew?
No, I think you're right. I don't know what they are. They do not look Islamic to me. And they don't look Sanskrit either, So down here you can see there is, from the top, English. There's Sanskrit. That looks like an Arabic script to me, and then more Sanskrit and more Arabic, or it might be actually the bottom is Urdu. I think, but yeah, those glyphs, they look Hebrew to me. But there you go. Anyway,
The real men.
that's all right.
Just curious.
So this is Nizamuddin. And in this area where you see these two men sitting down, that's where I was in my dream. So I didn't realize
Exact place.
So this was the area where I was dreaming. Yeah.
And
So-
where did you see the man with the rotten face? Right here.
Well, right here, yeah. Right, with the white hat and the kind of rotten face. So when I came here, then I was quite rattled. I was quite kind of, I was just nervous. And like normally, I don't really get that affected when I'm taking photographs. And I've taken photographs of, some quite transgressive things, like people drinking whiskey out of skulls in Hindu rituals, leprosy colonies. So, but I don't really think about it that much because I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I'm like thinking the camera is kind of a psychological barrier. Like I'm thinking about, am I getting good images? Is this a good representation? How am I telling the story? Those kind of things. But I was quite rattled here. You can see in the background there, you see all the locks and the strands again. So those are part of those representations of spells.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's important to realize when I say that, that's the equivalent of lighting a candle in a Catholic church, right? It's the same kind of thing. But equally, people don't realize when they're lighting a candle in a Catholic church, they're doing candle magic. It's the same thing with candles on a birthday cake. Make a wish. It is candle magic. So this is leaving offerings on one of the Sufi saints' tombs. There was certain areas I couldn't go inside because I wasn't a Muslim.
Is this looking through a lock or something when taking it?
It's looking through this balustrade, right? So it has kind of like this carved marble lattice work. So it's photographing through that. I was allowed to do that. And those are the pilgrims in the interior shrine. And these are women who were probably struggling with conceiving a child. And you can see these strings, these tied threads through the jali screens. This is kind of asking the sheikh to provide the woman with child. These are all portraits of the pilgrims. This little boy. So slowly we're getting to the area where I'm just taking pictures with the pilgrims, right? Then my colleague Sham spoke to the peer, which was the kind of the chief Sufi in the area, and explained what I was doing, and they pointed me in the direction of this area. So this area is where people who had jinn or evil spirit problems. So they encouraged me to go over and take a photograph. And this was the man in the white hat who was staring at me. And when I looked over, he was mouthing off like he was I could see he was swearing at me and like really kind of eyeballing me. And it just put the fear into me. I was just like, I think a jinn is looking at me.
Do you think this guy was possessed in some way?
Yeah. He was brought there to be treated for this. And yeah, that was it. So I took the photograph of him, and it was one of those ones where I honestly, it's the only time I've ever hesitated to take a photograph, because I was like, I don't know what this is going to cost me. And that dream really came back to haunt me in that moment, right? I was just like crippled with doubt to take it, but I did. But that's what you do when you're a photographer, right? You do your job. That's what you came there to get, that photograph to tell that story. But that's when I probably started to think about the world differently, because again, like we were chatting before we kind of hit record, in isolation, you look at those events and you can rationalize your way out of it. I struggled more and more to rationalize my way out of it. It put cracks in the wall of my worldview. I was like, I'm a guy, a guy in the white hat says, "Don't come here." And I look into the area where people who are, I'm told they're possessed with jinn, or come here for treatment for us to help them, relieve them of this oppression. And right there, eyeballing me, and really kind of, he is eyeballing me, and he is bawling me out of it. He's like, giving it all this. And then when I put my camera up, he just stops and looks deadpan into the camera. And that was it. And I took the pictures, finished up, and I just couldn't wait to get out of there. I'm not going to lie, I went straight back to my hotel and had a large whiskey. And that was it, got back to England. But it was one of those ones where it kind of, it rattled my cage for me. And that was kind of the start of where a lot of my kind of work in this area.
Was there any follow-on experiences after this trip? Like, did anything attach itself to you on the way back?
I don't think so. A lot of Sufis gave me a blessing. In fact, the guy Ali with the iron chain. So I did kind of, because I'd just been unnerved, everything just was going slightly wrong the whole time, and like I was saying, I wasn't an inexperienced photographer. I photographed a lot of stuff that a lot of people would struggle with, not, because it would just be difficult. And it might be a threatening subject. It might be, a challenging place to get to. I've had all those challenges before, but I was just unnerved by this sequence of events, the camera breaking, the dreams, that kind of run of bad luck that was noticeable. So I asked that Sufi for his blessing, and also kind of like, do you think that, maybe I've got an issue here, and he was like, he was very generous, and I think he could tell that I've kind of unnerved myself, and he was like, I think you're fine. I don't think you need to worry about it. Like, first off, you can hold the iron chain, right? And kind of get me a blessing. It's you're fine. Essentially, he said, you're small fry here. Don't worry about it. But that's kind of where a lot of my interest started. And when I got back, because it had kind of unnerved me so much, and I ended up kind of presenting the work, I did a lot more study into the Jinn, where they came from, what are the ideas around them, what's the mythology, and it's extraordinary, really. A huge amount of variation. It comes up in the Quran. I mean, the word jinn and variants occur at least like 29 times in the Quran. And like, for example, the word sea, bahar, occurs 33 times, so like the jinn are very much big figures in the Holy Quran. There's like conversations with the jinn in the Quran with significant figures. And if you equate that to, if you imagine like that happening and being determined as fairies in the Bible, that's kind of like the cultural significance that the jinn have in the Islamic world. By under no mistake, these are pre-Islamic things. They've been there for a very long time. And some of the figures they talk to.
Why they're very similar, almost identical to the Fae. Because those mound builders may have come from the Middle East, just ancient Middle East.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the first thing, the first big similarity is in the origin myths around them. So how the jinn are explained through an Islamic prism is very close to how fairies are explained through a Christian prism. So essentially, within the Islamic world, you've got three sapient beings, right? So you have angels, malak, who are made of light, jinn, who are made of smokeless fire, and human beings who are made of sounding clay, right?
Wait, spell malak?
It's Malaika.
Okay. Is it similar to, there's a Semitic demon called Adramelech?
No. I mean, it may be. I mean, you're in a kind of, an Abrahamic part of the world. The languages are going to have a lot of similarities. There could be something there to it.
Okay.
For sure.
I'll give you some background on that after the call.
Cool. And essentially, when Allah creates Adam, the human being, he orders the angels to bow down to him. Now, the angels not having free will, they do as they're commanded. But there's one among them, Iblis, who is a jinn of kind of such merit and prowess that he's been elevated to the host of angels. There's some minor Sufi thinking that actually Iblis was an angel, but just rejected everything and could move. Yes, there's counter different versions of this.
Where does
anyway,
shaitan fit into that? Because isn't shaitan
so
the Islamic equivalent of Satan, or
it's a categorization of jinn.
Okay.
So it's be very similar to saying demon, right? So if you're to say kind of like, it's similar to saying devil, right? So Satan seems to be cognate to shaitan for sure, right? But I think the meaning is slightly different. So it's more of a kind of a categorization rather than a specific being. But so Iblis refuses to bow down to prostrate himself to Adam, and he basically says, I'm better than him. I'm made of fire and he's made of sounding clay. And this is kind of where the schism happens, right? And he refuses to bow down. And for that reason, Allah casts him out, right? He's cast down. And it's here where Iblis then kind of promises to be the kind of the adversary of the human being on earth, right? He's going to, you know, attack them from above, below, from left, right, from behind and forward. He's going to try and lead them away from, he says, the straight path, the path to Allah. He's going to do his best to derail people. And he essentially threatens God, saying, I'll make these people hate you because of this. And interestingly, there is, again, a Sufi version of this that says, actually, the reason for Iblis prostrating himself to Adam is because he's the ultimate monotheist, right? Where he won't bow down to anything that is not Allah, right? And there's something to that, right? Because there's like Al-Ghazali, who's a medieval Sufi Muslim theologian. He narrates that he encountering Iblis on the slopes of Mount Sinai. Moses asks him, kind of like, "Oh, Iblis, why did you not prostrate yourself before Adam?" And Iblis replies, "Heaven forbid that anyone worship anything other than the one," right? This command was a test. So it's a very, very different way of looking at it. Now, incidentally, Iblis is depicted as a jet black person, so which correlates a little bit to our friend. So that's how the schism happens. So he's cast down from heaven, and that's where Iblis takes on this role to be the kind of the adversary on earth of human beings. Now, equally, we have the Christian version of how the fairies created, and it's somewhere between folklore and theology. So you have the story of the schism in heaven, the battle in heaven, where Lucifer raises an army to fight for control of heaven from God, and as a result, he's cast down for the sin of pride. Within the folklore in Ireland, the angels who were particularly bad, like Lucifer, fell into hell. The ones who were not quite so bad just fell below the earth into the cairns, into the mounds, and they became the fairies. So we have a very, very similar background from an Abrahamic point of view, right?
Is that really Christian theology, or is that just kind of what the church used to subsume pagan beliefs and structures into the church?
It's somewhere in between, like it's somewhere between folklore and theology, right? The bit from there's the casting down,
that's from theology.
Yeah,
right?
that's and then somewhere by the time Lucifer hits the ground, it goes into folklore, right? We get that change there. So that's, I think, the kind of the interesting part. But equally, we have specific details that are almost identical around these two categories of beings, fairies and jinn, that, bear in mind, they're supposed to be on the other ends of, not other ends of the earth, but they're not exactly side by side, right? Where there is a taboo around throwing dirty water out of the home, right? And in Cairo, it's one of these things where I read an account of a lady who was throwing dirty water out of the home onto the street, didn't say Bismillah, right? There happened to be a black dog walking up the road, and she went blind, right? The water fell in front of the black dog, and she went blind. It took numerous different visits to the doctor, didn't do anything, went to various different sheiks, and eventually one started kind of working with her and saying, the dog you threw the water in front of was a jinn. And as her sight slowly returned, what she was seeing in her eye was an image of the dog, till eventually her sight fully returned. So the taboo is you're supposed to say Bismillah before you throw dirty water out of your home, in case you hit anything that you can't see but is there. Now, that's from a book called Living with Jinns, an anthropological study by Dr. Barbara Dreislands. Now, I have a paper clipping from a paper in the west of Ireland called The West of People, where it talks about the same taboo when casting out dirty water from the home. You would say, huggy, ishka salak chocht. So it's like, look out, dirty water is coming, right? So you basically don't do it unannounced. You give fair warning to anything that you can't see that might be there. This blew my mind when I put these things side by side. I was like, these are exactly the same taboos and exactly the same way of dealing with those taboos. Now, in this paper clipping, it talked about a woman who didn't do that and suffered the repercussions just like her Egyptian counterpart. And this lady's face was on backwards when she woke up the following morning. It was tricky, not a pleasant thing to deal with. So we have these kind of incredible correlations. Now, if you recall earlier, the offerings that were given, they're the same. Milk and curds in India, milk and butter in Ireland. You have the same rough orient in terms of it being a battle in heaven, a schism in heaven that plays out on earth, right? And then you have this whole thing around that. And this is one I love it because it's so narrow, it's so specific on throwing dirty water out of the home. You have the same taboo. Now, you have wider taboos and wider areas that are the same, and it's around the area of things like taboos around childbirth and children and changelings. So there's specific jinns that are referred to as Lilu demons or Lilith, right? So within Jewish mythology, Lilith was supposed to be the first wife of Adam, but because she refused to lie below him, she lost out on that opportunity and she was cast out, right? So she is said to be the mother of demons, right? The mother of Jinn, right? That she represents this kind of child killer. She's like, her title is like Alet, the mother of night, mother of Jinn, El Confusa, the female scarab. So she represents this kind of dark female energy, this predatory nature. And she's the enemy of young mothers. She's the enemy of young children. Essentially, she's jealous of their motherhood, right? Because she didn't get that opportunity to be the mother of the human race because of her own pathos.
By the way, are you familiar with that movie, Lullaby?
No.
Just really quickly, do you know who Alan Greenfield is?
Yes, yeah. The ultra-terrestrials guy.
So his son wrote a screenplay for that movie. Mm-hmm. And it's all about like summoning Lilith and it's a really creepy movie, but there is some ceremonial magic that's built into that.
Oh, I bet,
movie. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there. She was talking about Lilith.
Cool. So Lilith and these Lilu demons are said to be consumed by this hatred of human children that they want to destroy them. Right. Now, equally, you have this concept of hybridism, of children that are the result of a coupling between Jinn and human beings. And we have kind of significant figures in history that are said to be part Jinn. So the Queen of Sheba was supposed to be part Jinn and have the legs of an ass, hairy legs of an ass. And Sargon of Akkad, said to be part Jinn, called himself a changeling. Now you go to Ireland and you have these similar danger points of when there's a young child in the home, that child may be swapped by the fairies with a changeling. And that's why they'd use the prophylactics of iron in the home to scare away the fairies from going near the child, right? And if a child was taken, the way they got the child back was said to use fire to scare the changeling into vanishing and the human being returning. And one of the methods they would do was be to heat a shovel in the fire and hold the red hot fire towards the changeling, and eventually the changeling would disappear, freak out, and the human child was said to be returned. Incidentally, not the same, but a similar treatment is used to quote unquote torture Jinn, using fire. So Jinn who have possessed a human being using a ruqya treatment to make the jinn uncomfortable and want to leave the body would be the holding of flames near the feet of the human victim. That would make the jinn want to loosen the grip. And it seems kind of like, if you believe it, that's what's happening, it seems kind of strange or illogical that the heat from this fire would make a being that's said to be formless, smokeless fire uncomfortable. But that's the treatment that is used. So it's similar, the use of heat and flame to drive away these creatures, to bring back, to depossess somebody, that's the correct term, but to relieve them of the possession.
Exercise. Yeah, exercise.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and yeah, it's extraordinary. And there's dozens more similarities between the jinn and the fairies. Like there's association with treasure. What's at the end of the rainbow? The leprechaun's treasure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what did the jinn said to guard? You know, where did Aladdin find the lamp? In the treasure, you know, in the cave full of treasure. They're very, very similar. Very, very similar in this respect.
What about this abduction sort of? I think Jeremy Cutchin, right? Did I say his name right?
Joshua Cutchin.
Joshua Cutchin.
Yep.
He talks about how these abduction scenarios, similar to ET entities or whatever, was also similar with the Fae. Is it this kind of similar with the Jinn too? There's instances like that.
I read about a case in Saudi Arabia where there's a teenage girl and she was possessed, and the possessed jinn said to the father, I'm going to take her away for 3 days. You won't find her, but she will be in this place in the city. Right. And then 3 days later, finds her there, brings her back. Then the jinn says again through the daughter, I'm going to take her away. She'll be gone for a week, and this time you'll never find her. And I found the earlier story in Arabic news archives. And then I found a follow-up story saying, you know, from a different newspaper talking about the same case where they hadn't found her, you know, where she was gone for a week and they still hadn't found her. So I think those things happen. Whether that's an abduction, you could argue the case, but the jinn was said to take this teenage daughter away. Certainly, I found more stories around being taken to fairyland, you know, Elfheim, within European folklore. But that's not to say, you know, that's more accessible to me. You know, I've got volumes of the stuff, but I think I'm sure there's fairly similar, you know, within it, Arabic lore. But within Irish fairy lore, it certainly exists. You know,
what about trapping these entities in the? You showed the clay pots, or
yeah, mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah,
what have you? What's the analog in fairy lore?
It depends on the certain type of fairy. You know, I'm bearing in mind that we're talking about the term like fairy, fae, or jinn. These are like, it's essentially like saying mammal. You know, it is a very, very broad category. But you have like certain types of, you would call them kind of a otherworldly being, like selkies, right? They're essentially seal people. There's selkies, which are these kind of very, very hoarse spirits that will invite people to ride them and then kind of like ride them to their deaths into the water. That's where they're kelpies. But the selkie is basically a creature that wears a seal skin, but sometimes it will come to the shore, take off its seal skin, and it's a beautiful human and will kind of, you know, dance in the foreshore. And there's lots of stories of like the fisherman finding the seal skin and hiding it, so the beautiful seal maiden will be his wife. And then the story inevitably, you know, unfolds over time that he has a wonderful family, he's super happy, but his seal wife is always seen looking out towards the sea, mournfully missing it, until someday one of the children says, oh, I saw this old sealskin in a box that was locked in a loft, and the seal wife is never seen again. She immediately goes, and sometimes the children go with her, you know, and it doesn't end well for the fisherman. There's always a moral motif in these things. You find a very similar story about, like, you know, the fox wife or the hare wife, you know, where the same thing happens. But in terms of that kind of direct trapping of a fairy. We don't really have that magical technology anymore. I mean, there might be some kind of, like hereditary magical or witchcraft families that are secretive, that may have that kind of spiritual technology. As far as I know, it's a little bit more obscure. It may be readily available. I'm just not aware of it. But there used to be these type of kind of practitioners called fairy doctors. And it was their job to go around and deal with fairy afflictions that families may have suffered from. And they would have been essentially those kind of cunning folk type, witchcraft type people who would alleviate those symptoms. So perhaps they would know that kind of magic.
Are these things, call them Jinn, Fae, whatever, what have you, are they universally malevolent, or are there different gradations of good and evil?
Totally different. Yeah. Good, evil, indifferent. It's so stratified and so varied that we can't go, right, they are all universally evil. I mean, you will get, even with Islam, when they talk about some of the jinn are Muslims, right? So they talk about like this jinn who follow the Quran and Muhammad, and they're seen as the good jinn. So it's very varied. In kind of the Scandinavia, you have the idea of like dark elves and light elves, so there's kind of broadly two tribes of these similar beings. In Scotland, you got the Seelie and Unseelie, they're kind of like the good, the bad, so there are kind of broad areas of kind of like they're good, they're bad, or badish, but broadly speaking, it's hugely varied.
And are these things real entities in your experience that we talked about in the beginning?
It's a great question. And I'm not going to skirt around it, but I'm going to give you a long-winded answer.
Long-winded side, probably better.
But I interviewed a lady from the Balkans, Dr. Maria Vojvod, and she did some research into, if I remember correctly, the Vash people of rural Serbia, very, very remote area of Serbia. And there is a phrase in the local language which roughly translates as "she who falls down." And this would happen to occasional teenage girls who would fall down yet find themselves in a tree. And then they would start talking about their sisters. Okay, their sisters who were these beautiful, kind of, ethereal women with long blonde hair who would be her sisters, who would come and see her on around kind of like the quarter days or particular holy days of the Orthodox calendar. And they would give her information. So Dr. Maria Vojvod found out about a lady, one of her research team found out about an individual who was one of these ladies, an older lady, again in the middle of nowhere. I think she had to get like a Land Rover to drive across like proper like European wilderness, and even kind of like even that was like really hard. It was extremely difficult to get to, but she managed to get to this really remote place where this woman lived. And the following day was going to be, I think it was Epiphany, and she was going to have contact with her sisters, quote unquote sisters. And there's a recording of this, which I'll send you the link to, but of this lady outside her home, and she's singing this song, right? It's kind of a chant song, and starts to call down these fairies, right? And then retires into her room and acts as a mediator between the community and these fairies. And it's like telling people, where's this person? Where's that person? Or will that man want to marry me? Or yes or no? Right. So she's giving this, it's kind of like an oracle. And Dr. Maria kind of basically went in to commune with her as well. And she turned around, she said, they're telling me that your father is not happy that he doesn't have his watch. And she was like, okay, don't know what that means. But a couple of days later, she's back at home and she mentions this to her mother. She's like, and her mother goes pale. And she's like, well, what is this? Her father's dead. Well, she's like, well, when your father died, he loved his watch and he asked to be buried with his watch, but it was an expensive watch, so I didn't want to bury him with it. I kept it. I have it here. So she's like, holy shit. And she's like, I never told anybody about this. So she picks this up in this rural village and comes back. And her sisters as well, she explained that her sisters could be very chastising. If they didn't think something was suitable, they would let the individual know very, very quickly, and sometimes physically, that they transgressed. So the women those who fall down would report being pinched and, being physical with them, as a form of chastisement. But interestingly, this both started with the onset of puberty and would happen at any time in the woman's life, but it ended at menopause. It ended when the woman stopped menstruating. But so I asked,
blood?
I think it's probably the energy of being like something to do with like human sexual fertility or something like that. And I asked Dr. Voivod, so why do you think this happens? Why does this happen? And her exact words to me, and I'll never forget them, she said, because it's real. I was like, that's good enough for me.
Any final words for the audience?
I mean, there's so much more layers to go into in Jinn lore and in fairy lore. It's a rich well, to kind of throw one's pail into. They're far more similar than you imagine. Far more similar than you imagine. And there's also some correlations which we would say around kind of like modern kind of alien abductions or alien experiences. There's some similarities there as well. So are they all the same thing? Maybe. Maybe we're engaging with an intelligence and we're observing it through specific cultural lenses. Like they're certainly interested in us.
Again, it's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
and I enjoyed talking to you about this, and we will definitely be doing a second episode on the Dark Man, particularly given all the weird stuff that happened to me before the interview. So I appreciate you, Darragh, and we will definitely talk soon.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.